Hey, Neurons, deep fried here. I know I'm playing catch up at this point because I did not upload 4 episodes last month. That means this month needs to have 5, which it will, I promise you, because I've been playing catch up all this time. And I'm really sorry that I didn't upload that episode, mostly because I was buried in assignments. But I promise to make it up to you. We will be on schedule for November. And uh, I think it's not denying now that like this podcast is extremely topical about what's happening in the country. So, well, if that's the vibe that you came for, thank you for tuning in. And well, another good news we have is that it's been 2 years since this podcast has been going on. I started the podcast in the beginning of October 2018, and it's October 2020. So I'm gonna pat myself on the back for keeping doing this for as long as I have. And well, I think I'll contextualize the rest of it in the later part of the episode. Oh, one more thing. Please go check out Snapmanlol, who made the new intro for the podcast. And I am extremely glad that he did. And now on, I'm going to use that because like he put a lot of effort into it. And I really think it's sick as fuck. So please check out Snapmanlol on YouTube. And that's it. I'm just going to cue the fucking. Before we start today's episode, I'd like you to know that I am not a Dalit, which means I don't have the experience of being one, or I have not faced this oppression or the institutionalized struggles that we're going to be talking about in today's episode. So, the first thing I want to do is point you in the direction of people who have lived through the experience of being a Dalit in India, in part, or still are in India. One of them being Yashica Dutt, who is a journalist and the author of the book called Coming Out as a Dalit. And the other one is Sumeet Samos, a rapper from Orissa and a student who talks about the experience of being a Dalit. Of course, both of these people have a larger following than I do, but I thought it was the right thing to do to point you in the direction of them. Nonetheless, not to mention both of them sort of speak English and communicate themselves in English, which sort of breaks that language barrier for most people. I know only 40% of you are Indians who listen to this podcast. And of course, both of them are extremely articulate when it comes to framing and structuring their arguments, which I find refreshing and very communicative. So please go check their content out. I have linked their Instagrams down in the description, which should lead you to their content. As to why this episode is important right now, there is a very pertinent reason, and there is a lot of ground to cover as to current events and context just to provide to this incident. So I'm going to start where I saw the story come up. Tanashri Pandey, a journalist with India Today, was present in Hathras when a dead body was being burned away from the family by the police without final rights or with dignity. She was thrown petrol on and then being burned, and the police was forming a chain, stopping the journalist from taking footage of it, but it was too late. She was already found by the journalist, some footage of her being burned in the pyre in the middle of the night, away from the family, and reportedly after the family was locked away, and the police was stopping the journalist and not answering their questions at all. After this news hit the mainstream media, 18 more rape cases came up between Hathras, Balrampur, Gorakhpur's Pipiganj, and more places. I think UP being the primary place where caste violence as a problem came forward, where Dalit women were raped by upper caste men consistently, and all of them, nearly all of them, had a pattern of harassing Dalit communities present in their villages. Now, to be honest, it is not surprising to this country that Dalit oppression is real. It has happened for centuries, nobody's in denial of it. And the fact that some communities have internalized it and sort of just tolerated it as a part of society is what's really sad. But the first time I read about it in a way that actually hit me quite hard is Akkarmashi, a book by Sharat Kumar Limbare, written in 1984 and then translated into multiple Indian languages and published by the Oxford University Press in English in 2003, which is how I came to know about it. Of course, it is one of the most important and most well-renowned books when it comes to Dalit literature. And I believe it's very important right now. While I understand most people are numbers people and quantitative data and qualitative analysis of quantitative data is very helpful when it comes to identifying sociological problems and then talking about them. But I do believe that the drive you need to stay persistent in these fights is through understanding the experience. And to be honest, this book comes the closest to hitting you with an experience that won't leave you. So I highly, highly, highly recommend that you go check this book out. I think it's very freely available. You'll find it on Amazon. I'll link it down in the description as well. And I'm going to talk about it now, just like give you not the story, but at least give you the overview. And the themes and the settings in it. Of course, the book is based in Maharashtra, and it is written in Marathi, and it talks about a very specific identity crisis of falling beneath the caste structure. If you don't know what the caste structure is, I'm going to explain it again. I'm pretty sure I've discussed it on the podcast before. We talked about the Egyptian mythology and how it was a justification of the Egyptian monarchy back then. Similarly, Hinduism was turned into something equally political, but this time it was a larger division of labor. There was a story of creation of the universe where Brahma creates the universe, and from his head come the Brahmins, from his hands comes the Kshatriyas, and then so on and so forth until the feet come about, where the Shudras and the lower castes come from. So there was an hierarchical system that completely gives you a role and assigns it to you at birth. Some people are born to be educated, some people are born to become warriors, and other people are born to be slaves. Incidentally, in the caste system, which is what's very dark about it. This system further evolved in such a place that untouchability towards the slaves became pertinent. The Dalit community was not to be touched. That's the level of stigma there was. And of course, it started not being as intense once the other rulers came about, especially in British India as well. And then the Indian government, as it was formed and written by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who wrote the constitution, recognized abolition of casteism as one of the primary goals of the new India. And it is a shame to say that we have not come very far. Sharat Kumar Limbare, the protagonist in this book, whose autobiography we're reading, Akkarmashi, was born in 1956 and he published this book in 1984. So his experience was recorded between that time. And given the violence that we're seeing in 2020, it is difficult to believe that it has gone away completely or even significantly, to call it a minor or a rare event, if you will. The larger theme in the book is an identity crisis. I think one of the lines that Sharat Kumar goes on is he is the untouchable, he's the outcast among the outcasts. I believe that's his exact line. And I'll explain to you why. Akkarmashi, as the word, actually means bastard in Marathi. And even bastards are a tame word of a translation for it. It's actually a bastard of an upper caste man and a lower caste woman. The story is pretty simple. Misamai, the mother of the protagonist, is kept as a concubine in exchange for a favor done to his father, and then that concubine, his mother Misamai, is sexually exploited by the landowner called Hanumanta Limbare, and the protagonist, Sharat Kumar, is born out of this wedlock or out of this sexual exploitation of his mother, and he's not owned by the father. He says, "That's not my child. That is your child." So the book sort of points out the hypocrisy that the untouchables are completely touchable if sexual violence is to be inflicted on them. But if they want to go and get water from the nearby shop, that's not allowed. He talks about how there are separate utensils and a separate line for Dalits at the store where they can't mingle with the rest of the community. But when it comes to gaining or exploiting sexual pleasure out of Dalit women, that kind of touchability is completely allowed. And the way he gets his father's name is because one of the schoolmasters, who's a little more progressive in this story, after Sharat Kumar makes it to the school, because he faces a lot of struggle not getting into schools as well because of his nature of his birth and circumstances of his birth. And just because it would make the other parents uncomfortable to send their children into this school, he's not allowed in. Once he gets into the school, the headmaster gives him his father's name, which is, by the way, protested by the landowner that this is not my child, why would you give him my name? But the headmaster sticks to his decision, and Sharat Kumar receives education, goes to college, becomes the author that we know him to be today. The story goes on. But the interesting themes in this entire book is just the way he talks about sexual exploitation of women, specifically Dalit women in this story. While the story itself is told from the perspective of a man who is uh, going through the experience of being an outcast among the outcasts, which means that even the Dalits don't consider him one of his own, at least in the beginning. Now he's an important figure in Dalit politics, to be honest. And of course, a hallmark figure in Dalit literature. But at the time, as a child, he felt that way. However, this book does talk about his experience in person, but his experience as a circumstance of birth is a result of sexual violence and denial of identity by oppression of the higher castes. And he's defined himself by that. And not to mention, his mother, who has to suffer through this, is also portrayed to be an extremely victimized person who has to work in the fields, and her occupation demands her oppression, which sort of is a theme that is explored throughout the book. The book sort of gives you a very, very intricate insight into the mind of an average Indian in that village and in that time, that not only did this person do this to another woman, that is, get her pregnant and then abandon her, but he lived in the same village with higher amounts of status and social capital and all of his money and power, and faced zero consequences socially for his actions. However, the boy and the woman was shamed and was denied their identity and place in society because of it. The book's world is very clearly a patriarchal society that endorses casteism. And I don't remember the author's name. I heard him speak a while ago where he was talking about how patriarchy in India is inherently casteist. It is only on the oppression of women that casteism can thrive. If I remember the name of the person and I find them out, I will leave a link down in the description where you can hear them speak for themselves. Who was at JLF New York, if I'm not wrong. In my personal capacity, I hope to contribute to this conversation a lot more. But in the capacity of deep fried neurons, at least I have taken up one thing to do is just to remind my audience that these problems exist and they are persistently present in our society. I do that through Instagram, and I would ask this to be the bare minimum. Remember that sensationalism and the way news consumption in today's world works, it sort of rewards a very strong emotional reaction for a very brief amount of time till another event that can come about that can provoke a really strong reaction comes out. So I would like everyone to remember the institutionalized versions of these problems and amplify these voices. Not to say that this is the only time this has happened. Feminists have done a very good job in the last 10 years of talking about women's problems and amplifying their voices and keeping this battle going and keeping this conversation in the forefront of society about female oppression. So we can do the same about caste violence. The way I do it is just set a daily reminder for all of my audience and tell them that caste-based violence is real, and so is rape culture, and we live in India and this is where it's prevalent. And also, of course, the fact that if the police are complacent with this, then they are funded by the taxes of the democratic government. And you can do the same. You can do that in your language. And if you don't just want to remind your friends and you want to do more, that's always welcome. There's always resources to find what you can do in your individual capacity for it. The way Deep Fried Neurons is doing it, you can do the same thing. You can literally, a story is all that takes. While you're brushing your teeth, just remind your friends that these problems are real. You can get creative with it. It's not like activism online is something I need to teach people. I feel like people do it much better and get more engagement from it. They get more eyes. They get that message out there properly. So This is what I'm trying to tell you. Just get involved in this conversation. It is important, specifically if you're Indian right now, that you get involved in this conversation. All right, people, that's all I have for you this week. I hope you enjoyed this episode and learned about something new, hopefully, and that you'll check out the book that I mentioned. Other than that, if you like this podcast, please check out more content. We're available on YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcast. Basically, I'm there. And if you really, really, really like the podcast, please consider supporting us on Patreon or buying the merch from the Instagram account, which we're selling. And if not, just hit subscribe on the YouTube page. That helps a lot. Follow me on Instagram. And if you have feedback, please leave a nice little comment in the comment section, or, just reach out to me on Instagram, whatever. Just take care. See you. Bye.